I never thought cleaning out my grandfather's garage would uncover the biggest secret of my life. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and 3 weeks ago, I was just another 28-year-old struggling to make ends meet as a freelance graphic designer in suburban Detroit, Michigan. Today, I'm sitting in a lawyer's office, holding a document that's about to turn my entire world upside down. Let me take you back to where it all started. The call came on a rainy Tuesday morning in October. I was hunched over my laptop, trying to meet a deadline for a client who kept changing their mind about color schemes, when my phone buzzed. The caller ID showed Aunt Linda, my grandfather's sister-in-law, the one who always smelled like lavender and made the best apple pie in all of Oakland County. "Sarah, honey?" Her voice was shaky, which immediately put me on edge. Linda never sounded uncertain about anything. "I need you to come over to your grandfather's house. There's something we need to discuss." My grandfather, William Bill Thompson, had passed away 6 months earlier. He was 84, a retired Ford assembly line worker who'd lived in the same modest ranch house in Warren, Michigan for over 40 years. We'd been closer than I was with my own parents, if I'm being honest. Every Sunday, I'd drive over with coffee and donuts, and we'd sit in his kitchen talking about everything from the Detroit Lions' latest disappointing season to his stories from the old days at the River Rouge plant. The funeral had been small but meaningful. About 30 people showed up, mostly neighbors, a few old co-workers, and our immediate family. My parents, Robert and Janet Mitchell, had handled most of the arrangements. They'd read his will, which was straightforward. The house went to my father, his only child. His savings account was split between my father and Linda, and I received his 1967 Mustang, a car he'd restored himself and always promised would be mine someday. I thought that was it. Case closed. Life moves on. But Linda's voice that morning told me I was very, very wrong. I grabbed my keys and drove the familiar route to Grandpa's house. The October air was crisp, and the maple trees lining his street were putting on their annual show of reds and golds. His house looked exactly the same as it always had. White aluminum siding, green shutters, a small front porch with 2 weathered chairs where he used to sit and wave at passing neighbors. Linda was waiting for me on that porch, clutching a tissue and looking like she'd aged 10 years since the funeral. She stood up as I approached, her usually perfect silver hair slightly disheveled. "Sarah, sweetheart," she said, pulling me into a hug that lasted longer than usual. "I'm so sorry to call you like this, but I couldn't handle this alone, and I didn't want to involve your parents until we figured out what this means." She led me inside, and immediately I was hit with that familiar scent. Old Spice aftershave mixed with coffee and just a hint of motor oil. The house felt frozen in time. Dad and Mom had been meaning to clean it out and put it on the market, but they'd been putting it off. I think we all were. Going through someone's belongings feels like you're erasing them, piece by piece. "Linda, what's going on?" I asked, settling into Grandpa's favorite recliner, the brown leather one with the permanent indent where he'd sat for decades. She sat across from me on the couch, wringing her hands. "I came by yesterday to start going through some of Bill's things. Your father asked me to help sort through the garage and basement, decide what to keep and what to donate." She paused, looking toward the kitchen. "I found something, Sarah. Something that doesn't make sense." My heart started beating faster. "What kind of something?" Linda reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope, the kind you'd find at any office supply store. It was slightly yellowed and had Sarah Mitchell written across the front in my grandfather's distinctive handwriting, all capitals, slightly slanted to the right. "I found this in his toolbox," she said, handing it to me. "The old red one he kept in the garage. It was tucked behind the bottom drawer, almost like he was hiding it." I stared at the envelope, my name in his handwriting, but I'd never seen it before. Did you open it?" Linda shook her head. "It's addressed to you. But Sarah, there's something else. The envelope is sealed with wax. Your grandfather hasn't sealed anything with wax since ever. This was important to him." My hands were trembling as I turned the envelope over. Sure enough, there was a small wax seal, deep red, with what looked like the initial T pressed into it. The wax was old but intact. "I don't understand," I whispered. "Why would he hide something for me? And why didn't he just give it to me when he was alive?" Linda leaned forward. "That's what I've been trying to figure out. But there's more, honey. When I found that envelope, I started looking more carefully through his things. I found a receipt from a lawyer's office, Jameson and Associates downtown. It's dated just 2 months before he died. She handed me a small piece of paper. It was a receipt for $500, marked Document Preparation Services. The date was August 15th, 2023. Grandpa had died in October. A lawyer? I looked up at Linda. But Dad handled all the legal stuff. He said Grandpa's will was simple, just the one document. That's what I thought too, Linda said quietly. But this receipt and this envelope. Sarah, I think there might be more to your grandfather's affairs than any of us realized. I held the envelope up to the light streaming through the living room window. I could see the outline of papers inside, several sheets by the look of it, not just a letter. Should I open it? I asked. Linda nodded. I think that's why he left it for you. I carefully broke the wax seal. Inside were 3 documents. The first was a letter, handwritten on his personal stationery, the kind with his name and address printed at the top. The second appeared to be some kind of legal document, with official-looking letterhead from Jameson and Associates. The third was a photocopy of what looked like a deed or property document. I unfolded the letter first. It was dated September 3rd, 2023, just a month before he died. My dearest Sarah, it began. If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and Linda has found this envelope where I asked her to look if anything happened to me. I pray you'll forgive an old man for keeping secrets, but some truths are too dangerous to share while everyone involved is still alive. I had to stop reading. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the paper. Linda moved to sit beside me on the couch. Take your time, honey, she said softly. I continued reading. What I'm about to tell you will change everything you think you know about our family, and I'm sorry for that burden. But you deserve the truth, and you deserve what's rightfully yours. There are things I never told your father, things about the past that I thought were better left buried. I was wrong. The letter went on to explain that my grandfather had been keeping a secret for over 30 years. In 1992, he'd inherited a piece of property from his older brother Thomas, who died in a car accident. This wasn't just any property. It was 40 acres of undeveloped land in northern Michigan, near Traverse City. The land seemed worthless then, the letter continued. Just woods and a small lake. Thomas had bought it in the 1960s with dreams of building a cabin, but he never got around to it. When he died, I was his only heir, so it came to me. I never told your father about it because, frankly, I forgot about it. It was just another piece of paperwork in a box. But here's where the story gets interesting. In 2019, a development company approached my grandfather about buying the land. They wanted to build a luxury resort and golf course. The offer was substantial, $2.8 million. I was 80 years old, the letter explained. What did I need with that kind of money? Your father and mother are comfortable. They have good jobs and a nice house. But you, Sarah, you've always struggled. You're so talented, so creative, but you've never had the opportunities you deserved. You're just like Thomas was, a dreamer who needed a chance. I looked up at Linda, who was watching me with tears in her eyes. Keep reading, she whispered. The letter revealed that my grandfather had sold the land, but hadn't told anyone. He'd used the money to set up a trust fund, specifically for me. But he'd also done something else. He'd created a second will, separate from the one my parents knew about. This second will detailed how the trust should be managed and included specific instructions about the money. Sarah, the letter continued, I know this is overwhelming. I know this will complicate things with your parents, but this money, it's not just money. It's freedom. It's the chance to pursue your art without worrying about rent. It's the opportunity to travel, to experience the world, to become the person I always knew you could be. The legal document was indeed a will, a complete, legally binding will that superseded the one my parents had read. This will not only detailed the trust fund, but also left me several other items. His collection of rare coins, which I'd never known existed, a safe deposit box at First National Bank, and something called the Thompson Family Archive. The third document was a copy of the deed to the property he'd sold, along with the sale agreement. The numbers were staggering. After taxes and fees, the net proceeds were $2.1 million, all of it placed in a trust with my name on it. I set the papers down on the coffee table and looked at Linda. This can't be real. Honey, I think it is, she said softly. The question is, what are you going to do about it? That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about money. This was about family secrets, about trust. about the fact that my grandfather had gone to elaborate lengths to hide this from my parents, his own son. Why? What was he afraid of? As I sat in that familiar living room, surrounded by the scent of Old Spice and the memories of 1,000 Sunday mornings, I realized that finding this envelope was just the beginning. I had so many questions, and most of the people who could answer them were dead. But one thing was clear: my life was never going to be the same. The drive home from Grandpa's house felt like navigating through a fog. My mind was racing, trying to process everything I'd just learned. A trust fund worth over $2 million, a second will, family secrets that had been buried for decades. I kept glancing at the manila envelope on my passenger seat, half convinced I'd imagined the whole thing. But the papers were real. The lawyer's letterhead was real. And somewhere in downtown Detroit, there was a law office that held the keys to understanding what my grandfather had really been thinking in his final months. I pulled into my apartment complex in Royal Oak, a modest 2-story building with about as much character as a cardboard box. My unit was on the second floor, a 1-bedroom with thin walls and a kitchen that barely qualified as functional. It was all I could afford on my inconsistent freelance income, but it was home. As I climbed the stairs, I noticed Mrs. Chen from next door peeking through her curtains. She was in her 70s, a retired teacher who'd made it her mission to keep track of everyone's comings and goings. Usually, her nosiness annoyed me, but today I found it oddly comforting. At least someone was paying attention to the world around them. I unlocked my door and immediately went to my kitchen table, spreading out the documents again. In the harsh fluorescent light of my apartment, they looked even more official, more real. I picked up the letter and read it again, searching for clues I might have missed. That's when I noticed something I'd overlooked before. At the bottom of the letter, in smaller handwriting, was a note. Linda knows where to find the key. Ask her about the fishing tackle box. A fishing tackle box? I'd never known my grandfather to fish. He'd always joked that he was too impatient to sit by a lake waiting for something to bite. But Linda would know what he meant. I grabbed my phone and called her. "Sarah?" She answered before the first ring finished. "How are you holding up?" "Linda, there's something else in the letter. He mentions a fishing tackle box and says you know where to find the key." "What key?" There was a pause. "Oh, honey, I was hoping you wouldn't notice that part until tomorrow. I needed time to think about whether I should tell you." "Tell me what?" Another pause. "There's a safe deposit box, Sarah, at First National Bank downtown. Your grandfather gave me the key about a year ago and made me promise to only give it to you if something happened to him. He said there were things in there that would explain everything." My heart started pounding again. What kind of things? I don't know. He wouldn't tell me. But Sarah, he was scared when he gave me that key. I'd never seen Bill scared of anything in all the years I knew him. Whatever's in that box, it's the reason he kept all of this secret. I looked at the clock. It was 4:30 p.m. Too late to get to the bank today. "Can you meet me there tomorrow morning, when they open?" "Of course. But Sarah, there's something else you should know. Your father called me about an hour ago. He's planning to come by the house tomorrow to start clearing out the garage. If he finds anything else," she didn't need to finish. "If Dad found evidence of the second will before I had a chance to understand what was happening, it would complicate everything. I needed to get to that safe deposit box first." "I'll pick you up at 8:30, I said. "The bank opens at 9. After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen, staring at the papers spread across my table. The reality of the situation was starting to sink in. This wasn't just about money. It was about family loyalty, about trust, about the fact that my grandfather had deliberately kept this secret from his own son. I thought about my relationship with my parents. We weren't close, but we weren't estranged either. We did the obligatory holiday dinners, the birthday phone calls, the occasional family barbecue. My father worked as a middle manager at an automotive parts company, and my mother was a secretary at a dental office. They were practical, hard-working people who'd never quite understood my artistic aspirations. When I'd graduated college with a degree in graphic design, they'd been supportive, but skeptical. "Art is nice, Sarah," my mother had said, "but you need something stable to fall back on." They'd wanted me to get a job at a big corporation, something with benefits and a steady paycheck. Instead, I'd gone freelance, living project to project, sometimes feast, sometimes famine. They'd helped me out financially a few times over the years, but always with the underlying message that I was making poor life choices. Now suddenly, I was potentially wealthier than they were, and they didn't know it. I picked up my phone again and almost called my best friend Maya, to tell her everything. Maya and I had been friends since college. She was the one person who'd always supported my decision to pursue art, even when it meant eating ramen for dinner 3 nights a week. But something stopped me. Grandpa's letter had emphasized secrecy, had warned about the dangers of sharing this information too soon. Maybe I needed to understand more before I told anyone else. Instead, I opened my laptop and started researching. I Googled Jameson and Associates Detroit and found their website. It was a small firm specializing in estate planning and family law. The partners were Edward Jameson and his daughter, Rebecca Jameson Hart. They'd been in practice for over 30 years. I also looked up the property my grandfather had sold. Using the address from the deed, I found the development company's website. Sure enough, they were building a luxury resort called Lakeview Estates. The promotional photos showed beautiful lakefront condos, a championship golf course, and a spa that looked like something from a magazine. The development was scheduled to open in the spring of 2024. My grandfather's 40 acres of worthless woods were now the centerpiece of a multi-million-dollar resort. But why had he kept it secret? And why had he been scared, as Linda described? I spent the next hour reading everything I could find about estate law, trust funds, and inheritance disputes. What I learned made my stomach churn. Family fights over money were common, often bitter, and sometimes destroyed relationships permanently. Was that what Grandpa had been afraid of? That this windfall would tear our family apart? Around 8 p.m., I ordered Chinese takeout and continued researching. I found several news articles about families torn apart by unexpected inheritances, about legal battles that lasted years, about siblings who never spoke again after fighting over their parents' estates. But I also found stories of people whose lives had been transformed by unexpected financial windfalls, people who'd used inheritance money to start businesses, to pursue education, to support causes they cared about. As I sat eating lo mein and reading about trust funds, I started to understand what my grandfather might have been thinking. He'd seen something in me, some potential that even I wasn't sure I possessed. The money wasn't just about making my life easier. It was about giving me the freedom to take risks, to pursue my art without the constant worry about paying rent. But he'd also been smart enough to realize that this kind of money would change family dynamics. My parents would have questions. They might feel hurt that he'd chosen to give me such a substantial inheritance while leaving them with relatively modest bequests. They might even challenge the will. Around 10 p.m., I called Maya after all. "Sarah, how's the struggle going today?" she answered, her voice cheerful despite the late hour. Maya was a night owl, a freelance writer who did her best work after everyone else had gone to bed. "Maya, I need to tell you something, but you have to promise to keep it between us." Her tone immediately became serious. "What's wrong?" I told her everything. The envelope, the letter, the second will, the trust fund. When I finished, there was silence on the other end of the line. "Holy shit, Sarah," she finally said. "You're rich." "I don't know if I'm rich. I don't even know if this is legal, and I haven't told my parents yet." "Why not?" I explained my grandfather's warnings about secrecy, about the potential complications with the family. "Sarah," Maya said carefully, "I get why you're scared, but you can't keep this secret forever. And honestly, if your grandfather wanted you to have this money, then it's yours. Your parents will have to deal with it. But what if they never forgive me? What if they think I manipulated him somehow?" "Did you manipulate him?" "Of course not. I didn't even know about any of this until today." "Then you have nothing to feel guilty about. Your grandfather made his choice for his own reasons." We talked for another hour, and by the time I hung up, I felt a little better. Maya was right. I hadn't done anything wrong, but I still needed to understand more before I decided what to do next. I went to bed around midnight, but sleep was impossible. I kept thinking about the safe deposit box, about what secrets it might contain. I thought about my grandfather, about all those Sunday mornings when he'd had this enormous secret and never given me even a hint. Had he been planning to tell me? Had he been waiting for the right moment? Around 2 a.m., I got up and read the letter again. This time, I noticed something else I'd missed. Near the end, he'd written, "I've made mistakes, Sarah. Things I did when I was younger that I'm not proud of. But this money, it's clean. It's yours. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." What mistakes? What had he done when he was younger? I finally fell asleep around 3 a.m., clutching the letter like a lifeline. Tomorrow, I would find out what else my grandfather had been hiding. and then I would have to decide what to do with the truth. I woke up at 7 a.m. with a headache and the taste of anxiety in my mouth. The manila envelope was still on my nightstand, and for a moment, I hoped I'd dreamed everything. But the papers were real, and in 2 hours, I'd be walking into a bank to uncover whatever final secrets my grandfather had left behind. I showered and dressed carefully, choosing a simple black dress that made me look older, more serious. If I was going to be dealing with lawyers and banks, I wanted to project confidence, even if I felt like I was falling apart inside. The drive to Linda's house took me through the same neighborhoods I'd known my whole life. Warren, Michigan isn't glamorous, but it's home. Blue-collar families, small houses with well-maintained lawns, American flags on front porches. This was where my grandfather had built his life, where he'd raised my father, where he'd kept his secrets. Linda was waiting on her front porch when I arrived. She was dressed in her best outfit, a navy blue dress with a matching jacket, the kind of thing she wore to church on Easter Sunday. Her usually perfect hair was styled, but I could see the worry in her eyes. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked as she got into my car. "A little. You?" "Not much." She settled into the passenger seat and looked at me seriously. "Sarah, before we go to the bank, I need to tell you something. After you left yesterday, I went back to Bill's house and looked through that toolbox more carefully." My heart skipped. "What did you find?" "More envelopes. 3 of them. All sealed with wax, all with different names on them." I had to pull over to the side of the road. "What names?" "Your father's name was on one. Mine was on another. And the third," she paused. "The third had a name I didn't recognize. Margaret Sullivan." "Who is Margaret Sullivan?" "I have no idea. But Sarah, if there are letters for other people, maybe this is bigger than we thought. Maybe your grandfather was planning to reveal everything to everyone, and he just ran out of time." I sat in my parked car, trying to process this new information. "Did you open any of them?" "No, they're not addressed to me." "Well, except for the one that is. And I thought we should go to the bank first before I read mine." We sat in silence for a moment. Then Linda reached over and squeezed my hand. "Whatever we find today, we'll figure it out together, okay?" I nodded, put the car back in drive, and headed toward downtown Detroit. First National Bank was in a tall building on Woodward Avenue, one of those imposing structures that made you feel small just walking through the doors. The lobby was all marble and brass, with high ceilings and the kind of hushed atmosphere that suggested serious financial business. I approached the information desk, where a young woman in a sharp suit smiled at me professionally. "I need to access a safe deposit box," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Of course. Do you have your key and identification?" Linda handed me a small brass key, and I showed my driver's license. The woman typed something into her computer, then frowned. "I'm sorry, but I don't see a box registered under your name." My heart sank. Could it be under William Thompson? More typing. "Yes, here it is. Box 247, registered to William Thompson, but I'm sorry, only authorized users can access the box." I felt panic rising in my chest. "But he's deceased. I'm his granddaughter, and I have the key." The woman's expression softened slightly. "I understand, but we'll need to see documentation proving you're authorized to access the box. Usually this would be handled through the estate attorney." Linda leaned forward. "Excuse me, but what kind of documentation?" "Well, a death certificate, probate documents, or a letter from the estate attorney authorizing access. Or..." She paused, checking her computer again. "Actually, it looks like Mr. Thompson left specific instructions. He named an authorized representative who could access the box in the event of his death." "Who?" "Sarah Mitchell." I stared at her. "That's me." "Oh!" The woman looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize. Yes, you're listed as the authorized representative. I'll just need to verify your identity and we can access the box immediately." 10 minutes later, Linda and I were sitting in a small private room with safe deposit box 247 on the table between us. The box was larger than I'd expected, about the size of a briefcase. My hands were shaking as I turned the key. Inside, the box was packed with documents, photographs, and several smaller items wrapped in cloth. I started lifting things out carefully, setting them on the table. The first item was a thick folder labeled Thompson Family History. Inside were documents going back generations, birth certificates, marriage licenses, immigration records. I quickly realized this was the Thompson Family Archive mentioned in the will. The second item was a jewelry box. Inside was a collection of rings, necklaces, and brooches that looked expensive, but old-fashioned. At the bottom of the box was a note. These belong to your great-grandmother, Margaret Thompson. She would have wanted you to have them. The third item made my breath catch. It was a photograph of a young woman holding a baby. The woman looked familiar, but I couldn't place her. On the back, someone had written, Margaret and baby Sarah, 1962. Linda, I whispered, showing her the photo. This woman? Do you recognize her? Linda studied the photo carefully. Then her face went pale. Oh my God, Sarah, I think this might be your grandmother. But my grandmother died when I was a baby. Her name was Helen. No, honey. Helen was your father's stepmother. She married your grandfather when your father was about 10 years old. Your father's real mother. Her name was Margaret. I stared at the photo. The woman in the picture looked to be in her 20s, with dark hair and eyes that looked just like mine. She was holding a baby who couldn't have been more than a few months old. But the baby, I said slowly. The note says, Baby Sarah. But this is from 1962. I wasn't born until 1995. Linda was quiet for a long moment. Sarah, I think we need to keep looking through these documents. The next item was a manila folder labeled Legal Documents, Confidential. Inside were papers I didn't understand at first. Court documents, legal filings, what looked like adoption papers. But as I read more carefully, a picture began to emerge that made my world tilt on its axis. The documents told the story of Margaret Thompson, my grandfather's first wife, who had died in a car accident in 1963 when my father was just a year old. But there was more. Margaret had had a sister, Margaret Sullivan, who had been pregnant at the time of the accident. Margaret Sullivan had given birth to a daughter in 1962. The baby's name was Sarah. I looked at Linda, who was reading over my shoulder. This can't be right. But there was more. The documents showed that Margaret Sullivan had been unable to care for the baby and had given her up for adoption. The adoption had been arranged through a Catholic charity in Detroit. The baby had been placed with a family named Mitchell, Robert and Janet Mitchell. Linda, I whispered. I think I'm adopted. Linda's face was white. Sarah, we need to slow down. This is a lot of information, and we might be misunderstanding something. But I was already reaching for the next document, and this one confirmed everything. It was a birth certificate, my birth certificate, showing that I'd been born to Margaret Sullivan on March 15, 1962, not 1995. 1962. I was 61 years old, not 28, but that was impossible. I looked at the document again, and then I saw my mistake. There were two birth certificates. The first was for a baby named Sarah Sullivan, born in 1962. The second was for me, Sarah Mitchell, born in 1995. I set the documents down and tried to think clearly. Linda, I think there were two Sarahs. One was Margaret Sullivan's daughter, born in 1962. The other is me, born in 1995. But then why would your grandfather have this older Sarah's birth certificate? I kept looking through the documents, and slowly, the truth began to emerge. Margaret Sullivan's daughter, the first Sarah, had grown up and had a daughter of her own. That daughter had been my mother, Janet, which meant that Janet Mitchell wasn't just my adoptive mother. She was my biological mother, and she was the daughter of Margaret Sullivan, my grandfather's sister-in-law. The documents showed that Janet had grown up knowing she was adopted, but had never known the identity of her birth family. She'd met my father, Robert, in college, and they'd fallen in love and married. When they'd had trouble conceiving, they'd decided to adopt. But here's where it gets complicated. My grandfather had known all along that Janet was his sister-in-law's granddaughter. He'd known when she married his son. He'd known when they adopted me. He'd known that I was actually his great-great-niece, not just his adopted granddaughter. And he'd never told anyone. I looked at Linda, who was staring at the documents with her mouth open. Linda, do you understand what this means? She nodded slowly. It means you're not just Bill's granddaughter by adoption. You're his actual family. You're Margaret Sullivan's great-granddaughter. And Margaret Sullivan is the woman whose name was on the third envelope I found in the toolbox. I reached for the last item in the safe deposit box. It was a letter, sealed in the same way as the others. But this one was addressed to me in different handwriting. The return address showed it was from a law firm in Traverse City, Michigan. I opened it carefully. Inside was a letter from a lawyer named David Henderson, dated just 1 week before my grandfather's death. Dear Miss Mitchell, it began, I am writing at the request of my client, Margaret Sullivan, who has recently learned of her connection to your family. Ms. Sullivan is currently 89 years old and in failing health. She has asked me to prepare documents that would transfer her estate to you upon her death, as you are her only living descendant. The letter went on to explain that Margaret Sullivan had spent her entire life trying to find her daughter, the baby she'd given up for adoption in 1962. She'd finally tracked down Janet Mitchell, only to discover that Janet had died in a car accident in 2018, something I'd never mentioned to my grandfather because it had happened during a period when we weren't talking much. But Margaret had also discovered that Janet had had a daughter, me, and through her lawyer, she'd contacted my grandfather to arrange a meeting. Ms. Sullivan's estate includes her home in Traverse City, as well as approximately $800,000 in savings and investments. She wishes to leave everything to you, as she considers you the continuation of her family line. The letter was dated October 1st, 2023. My grandfather had died on October 15th. I looked at Linda. Do you think they met? My grandfather and Margaret Sullivan? Linda was quiet for a moment. I think that's what the envelope with her name on it will tell us. As we packed up the contents of the safe deposit box, I realized that my grandfather's secret was much bigger than I'd imagined. It wasn't just about the money from the land sale. It was about family, about connections that had been lost and found, about the fact that I was part of a story that went back generations. But it was also about the fact that my parents, the people who'd raised me, who'd loved me, who'd given me their name, had been kept in the dark about all of this. As we walked out of the bank, I felt the weight of multiple secrets pressing down on me. I now knew that I was related to my grandfather in ways I'd never imagined. I knew that there was another inheritance waiting for me from a great-great-grandmother I'd never met. I knew that my family history was completely different from what I'd always believed. But I also knew that when I told my parents about any of this, it would change everything between us forever. The drive back to Linda's house was silent, except for the sound of my turn signal clicking as I navigated the familiar streets. Both of us were lost in our own thoughts, trying to process everything we'd discovered. The contents of the safe deposit box were in a canvas bag on the back seat, and I kept glancing at it in the rearview mirror as if it might disappear. When we pulled into Linda's driveway, I saw my father's pickup truck parked in front of my grandfather's house next door. My stomach dropped. "He's early," Linda said quietly. "He wasn't supposed to be here until this afternoon." Through the garage door, I could see my father moving around, probably starting to sort through Grandpa's belongings. The irony wasn't lost on me. He was cleaning out the garage where Linda had found the envelope that was about to change all our lives. "What do I do?" I asked Linda. She looked at me with the kind of expression that told me she was about to give me advice I didn't want to hear. "Honey, you have to tell him. You have to tell them both. This has gone beyond what you can handle alone." "But what if they hate me? What if they think I knew about this somehow?" "Sarah, look at me." Linda's voice was firm but gentle. "Your parents love you. Yes, this is going to be shocking. And yes, they're going to have questions. But you didn't create this situation. Your grandfather did. And he did it because he loved you and wanted to make sure you were taken care of." I took a deep breath. "Will you come with me?" Of course. We gathered the documents and walked across the small patch of lawn between Linda's house and Grandpa's. I could hear my father moving boxes around in the garage, occasionally muttering to himself, something he'd always done when he was focused on a task. "Dad?" I called out as we approached. He emerged from behind a stack of boxes, wiping his hands on an old rag. Robert Mitchell was 58 years old, with graying hair and the kind of build that came from 40 years of office work. Not overweight, but soft around the edges. He was wearing his weekend uniform, jeans, a Detroit Lions t-shirt, and work boots that had seen better days. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" His face lit up with genuine pleasure. "And Linda, good to see you." "Hi, Dad." I could hear the tension in my own voice. "We need to talk to you about something important." His expression immediately became concerned. "What's wrong? Is everything okay?" "Everything's complicated," I said. "Is Mom here?" "No, she's at home." "Why? Sarah, you're scaring me." Linda stepped forward. "Robert, why don't we go inside? This isn't something we should discuss in the driveway." Dad looked between us, clearly picking up on the serious tone. "Okay, sure. Let me just close up the garage." A few minutes later, we were sitting in Grandpa's living room again, the same room where this had all started just 24 hours ago. Dad settled into the same chair I'd been in yesterday, and I realized I was about to blow up his world the same way mine had been blown up. "Dad," I began, then stopped. How do you tell someone that everything they think they know about their family is wrong? Robert, Linda said gently, Sarah found something yesterday when I was cleaning out Bill's things. Something that we needed to investigate before we could talk to you about it. I pulled out the manila envelope with my name on it. This was hidden in Grandpa's toolbox. Dad looked at the envelope, recognizing his father's handwriting. What is it? It's a letter and some legal documents. Dad, there are things about Grandpa's estate that we didn't know about. I handed him the letter first, watching his face as he read. I could see the exact moment when he got to the part about the land sale, because his eyebrows shot up and he looked at me with shock. $2.1 million? He said quietly. Keep reading. When he finished the letter, he set it down carefully and looked at me. Sarah, I don't understand. Why would he hide this from me? Why would he set up a trust for you and not tell anyone? There's more, Dad. We went to the bank this morning. Grandpa had a safe deposit box, and what we found there... I paused, trying to find the right words. Dad, what do you know about your mother? Your real mother, not Helen. His face went pale. What does my mother have to do with this? Everything, I said softly. I spread out the documents on the coffee table. The birth certificates, the adoption papers, the family photographs. I explained about Margaret Thompson, about her sister Margaret Sullivan, about the baby who was given up for adoption in 1962. Dad, the baby that Margaret Sullivan gave up for adoption grew up to be Janet. Mom is your aunt's granddaughter. Dad stared at the documents for a long time without speaking. Finally, he looked up at me. Are you saying that your mother and I are related? Distantly. You're second cousins, technically. But more importantly, it means that I'm not just your adopted daughter. I'm actually related to you by blood. I'm Grandpa's great-great-niece. And your grandfather knew this? Yes. He figured it out when you and Mom got married. He recognized Mom's adoption records because he'd helped Margaret Sullivan with the arrangements back in 1962. Dad was quiet for several minutes, processing everything. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, controlled. So, let me make sure I understand this. My father discovered that the woman I married was actually his niece's granddaughter. He never told us. And then he found out that this woman's sister, a woman he'd never met, wanted to leave you money. So he decided to leave you money too. But he hid it from everyone. That's basically it. And you found out about this yesterday? Yes. Dad stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street where he'd grown up. Sarah, do you have any idea what this means? What this is going to do to our family? I felt my heart sink. Dad, I know this is complicated. Complicated? He turned around, and I could see anger building in his eyes. Sarah, my father lied to me. For decades, he knew that your mother was family, and he never said a word. Do you know how many family dinners we had where he sat there knowing this secret? Dad, maybe he had reasons. What reasons could possibly justify this? His voice was getting louder. And the money. Sarah, he left you over $2 million and left me the house. Do you understand how that looks? Do you understand what your mother is going to think when she finds out that my father thought you deserved millions of dollars, but we deserved nothing? Linda stood up. Robert, that's not fair. Bill left you the house, and he left you his savings. He took care of you too. Linda, the house is worth maybe $150,000. His savings account had $30,000 in it. Sarah is getting $2 million plus whatever this Margaret Sullivan woman left her. I felt tears starting to form. Dad, I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't even know about it. I know you didn't ask for it, but that doesn't change the fact that it's happening. He sat back down, running his hands through his hair. Sarah, I need you to understand something. Your mother and I have worked our entire lives to provide for you. We've never had much, but we've always made sure you had what you needed. We helped you through college. We helped you when you were struggling with your freelance work. I know, Dad. I'm grateful for everything you've done. Are you? Because it seems like my father thought we weren't doing enough. It seems like he thought you needed rescuing from the life we gave you. That hurt more than I expected. That's not what this is about, isn't it? Sarah, read that letter again. He talks about how you've always struggled and how you've never had the opportunities you deserved. What does that say about how he viewed your upbringing? I looked at Linda, hoping for support, but she was staring at the floor. I realized that Dad had a point. Grandpa's letter did imply that my parents hadn't been able to provide for me adequately. Dad, I think Grandpa was just trying to help. I think he saw an opportunity to give me financial security, and he took it. By lying to everyone involved. Maybe he was planning to tell you. Maybe he just ran out of time. Dad picked up one of the other envelopes from the table, the one with his name on it. Well, let's find out, shall we? He broke the wax seal and pulled out a letter. As he read, his expression went through several changes: surprise, confusion, and finally, a kind of resigned sadness. "What does it say?" I asked. He handed me the letter. It was shorter than mine, but just as carefully written. "My dear son," it began, "if you're reading this, then Sarah has found her letter and you know about the trust fund. I know you're angry with me and you have every right to be. I kept secrets from you that I should have shared long ago. But I need you to understand why I did what I did. When you married Janet, I recognized her immediately. She looked exactly like her grandmother, Margaret Sullivan, who had been my wife's sister. I knew that Janet was the baby that Margaret had given up for adoption in 1962, but Janet didn't know her family history, and I thought it would be cruel to tell her that her birth mother was dead. So I kept quiet. I watched you build a life together, watched you adopt Sarah, watched you become the kind of father I had tried to be to you. I was proud of the man you became, Robert. I was proud of the family you built. But when Margaret Sullivan contacted me earlier this year, I realized that secrets have a way of coming out whether we want them to or not. She was dying, and she wanted to leave her estate to her only living descendant, Sarah. She asked me to help her make sure Sarah would be taken care of after we were both gone. The money from the land sale was my contribution to that plan. It wasn't about thinking you and Janet weren't good enough parents. It was about giving Sarah opportunities that neither you nor I ever had. It was about freedom, the freedom to take risks, to pursue her art, to travel, to experience the world without worrying about money. I know this complicates things. I know it raises questions about family loyalty and fairness. But Robert, you have always been practical, responsible, grounded. You don't need millions of dollars to be happy. Sarah is different. She's an artist, a dreamer, like her great-great-grandmother Margaret Thompson was. She needs different kinds of support. Please don't be angry with her. She had nothing to do with my decisions. And please, don't let this destroy the family we've all worked so hard to build. The money doesn't change who we are to each other. When I finished reading, I looked at Dad. His anger seemed to have faded, replaced by something that looked like exhaustion. He was trying to take care of everyone, Dad said quietly, in his own misguided way. "Dad, what do we do now?" He was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "We tell your mother. We sit down as a family and figure out how to move forward. Are you still angry?" "I'm hurt," he said honestly. "I'm hurt that my father didn't trust me enough to include me in these decisions. I'm hurt that he thought he needed to go around me to take care of you. But I'm not angry at you, Sarah. This isn't your fault." Linda, who had been quiet through most of this conversation, finally spoke up. "There's one more thing you should know. I found another envelope in Bill's toolbox, one addressed to me." She pulled out her own letter and opened it. As she read, her expression became thoughtful. "What does yours say?" I asked. "It's instructions," she said, "about how to help you navigate all of this. He knew this would be overwhelming, and he wanted to make sure you had support." She looked at both of us. "He also left me some money, enough to hire a lawyer to help sort out the legal complications, and enough to help mediate between the family if needed." Dad laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Of course he did. He thought of everything except actually talking to us while he was alive. "Robert," Linda said gently, "I think he was scared. I think he knew that once he started telling these secrets, everything would change, and he wasn't sure he was ready for that." "Well, everything is changing anyway," Dad said. "The question is whether we can change together or whether this tears us apart." I looked at my father, this man who had raised me, loved me, supported me, even when he didn't understand my choices. He was right that this changed things. The money would give me opportunities I'd never had before, but it also meant that the family dynamics I'd known my entire life were shifting in ways we couldn't predict. "Dad," I said, "I want you to know that whatever happens with this money, it doesn't change how I feel about you and Mom. You're my parents. You raised me. You loved me when no one else would. That doesn't change because of some paperwork in a bank vault." He smiled for the first time since we'd started this conversation. "I love you too, Sarah. And your grandfather was right about one thing. You do deserve opportunities. I just wish he'd found a way to give them to you without all the secrecy." Maybe we can figure out how to handle this together, I said. Maybe we can find a way to use this money that honors what Grandpa wanted, but also keeps our family intact. Maybe, Dad said. But first, we need to call your mother. She's going to want to hear about this from us, not from someone else. As Linda and I gathered up the documents, I realized that finding that envelope in Grandpa's toolbox had been just the beginning of a much longer journey. The money was life-changing, but the family secrets were even more significant. We were all going to have to figure out how to be a family with this new knowledge, how to build trust after decades of hidden truths. But as I looked at my father, at the man who had chosen to love me, even when he didn't have to, I felt hopeful. We'd gotten through challenges before. Maybe we could get through this one too. The phone call to Mom would be difficult. The conversations with lawyers would be complicated. The decisions about how to handle Margaret Sullivan's inheritance would be complex. But for the first time since I'd opened that envelope, I felt like I wasn't facing this alone. I had my family. Complicated, imperfect, but ultimately loving. And maybe that was worth more than any amount of money in any trust fund. As we walked out of Grandpa's house together, I realized that his final gift to me wasn't just financial security. It was the truth about who I really was, where I came from, and the complex web of love and loyalty that connected all of us. It wasn't the inheritance I'd expected, but it was the one I needed. 6 months later, I'm sitting in the sunroom of my new house, a modest but beautiful craftsman bungalow in Ferndale, Michigan, about 20 minutes from where I grew up. The house has a studio in the back where I can work on my art without worrying about bothering neighbors or paying rent. The legal complications took months to sort out, but everything is settled now. The trust fund is officially mine, and Margaret Sullivan's estate, she passed away just 3 weeks after Grandpa died, has been transferred to me as well. In total, I inherited just over $3 million. But more importantly, I inherited a family story that's more complex and beautiful than I ever imagined. The journey to get here wasn't easy. That phone call to Mom, made from Grandpa's living room with Dad and Linda by my side, was one of the hardest conversations of my life. I can still hear the sharp intake of breath when Dad told her about the inheritance, the long silence when he explained about Margaret Sullivan, and then the quiet sob when she realized what it all meant. "I'm adopted," she had whispered over the phone. All these years, I wondered why I felt different from my adoptive parents, why I never quite fit in with their family traditions. Now I know. The weeks that followed were a roller coaster of emotions for all of us. Mom went through what she called her identity crisis, suddenly questioning everything she thought she knew about herself. She spent hours looking through the family photographs from Margaret Sullivan's estate, tracing the resemblances between herself and relatives she'd never known existed. "Look at this," she said one evening, pointing to a black and white photo from the 1940s. "This woman has my exact same nose, and her hands, they're shaped just like mine." The most difficult part came when we had to figure out how to handle the practical aspects of the inheritance. The lawyers, Edward and Rebecca Jameson, were patient but thorough. Every document had to be verified, every claim substantiated. There were tax implications none of us had considered, and legal complexities that required multiple consultations. "Inheritance disputes are common," Rebecca Jameson Hart explained during one of our meetings. "Even when everyone gets along, money changes family dynamics. The key is to be transparent about everything from the start." That transparency was harder than any of us expected. My parents had to confront their own feelings about money, about fairness, about what they deserved versus what I deserved. There were difficult conversations about whether I should share the inheritance with them, whether Grandpa's division of assets was fair, whether his secrecy had been justified. "I keep thinking about all the times we worried about money," Mom told me one afternoon as we sat in her kitchen. "All the times we had to say no to things you wanted because we couldn't afford them. Dance lessons, art camp, that trip to Europe with your college friends. If your grandfather had this money all along." "Mom, he didn't have this money all along. He only got it 3 years ago, and he was trying to figure out what to do with it. But he could have told us. We could have made decisions together as a family." She was right, and that was the hardest part to accept. Grandpa's good intentions had created a web of secrecy that affected all of us. But gradually, we began to understand his perspective. He'd grown up during the Depression, had lived through decades of financial uncertainty. To him, having money was less important than making sure it went to the right people for the right reasons. The breakthrough came when we visited Margaret Sullivan's house in Traverse City. I'd inherited the property along with her other assets, and we'd driven up north to see it and decide what to do with it. The house was a small cottage on Crystal Lake, surrounded by tall pine trees and overlooking water so clear you could see the bottom 20 feet down. It was like stepping into a fairy tale, the kind of place you see in magazines and think only exists in dreams. But what struck me most was how lived in it felt. Margaret Sullivan had clearly spent her final years here, and everywhere we looked, there were traces of a life fully lived. Books stacked by the fireplace, half-finished crossword puzzles on the kitchen table, a garden where she'd obviously spent hours tending to her flowers. In the bedroom, we found more photographs, dozens of them, chronicling a life we'd never known about. Margaret as a young woman in the 1940s, working as a nurse in Detroit. Margaret with friends, with co-workers, with the various families she'd helped care for over the years. And in a frame by her bedside, a photo of a baby that could only have been my mother. She never forgot, Mom said quietly, holding the photograph. All these years, she never forgot the daughter she gave up. But the most revealing discovery was Margaret's journal, found in a desk drawer in the living room. The final entries, written just weeks before her death, told the story of her desperate search for her daughter and granddaughter. She'd hired private investigators, contacted adoption agencies, spent thousands of dollars trying to track down the family she'd lost. July 10th, 2023, one entry read, "The investigator found her, Janet Sullivan, now Janet Mitchell, living in Warren, Michigan. She's 61 years old and has a daughter named Sarah. She married a man named Robert Mitchell in 1989. They live just 20 minutes from where I gave her up for adoption all those years ago. She's been so close all this time." Another entry, dated a week later. "I called the law firm today. I want to leave everything to Sarah. She's my legacy, the continuation of our family line. But I don't want to disrupt their lives. I need to find a way to do this that won't hurt anyone." The final entry, written just days before she contacted my grandfather, was heartbreaking. "I'm running out of time. The doctors say I have maybe 6 months. I need to make sure Sarah is taken care of, but I also need to respect the life Janet has built. Maybe if I work through Bill Thompson, we can find a way to do this right." Reading those journals helped us understand that the secrecy hadn't been about keeping us apart. It had been about protecting us. Both Margaret and Grandpa had been trying to navigate an impossible situation, trying to right old wrongs without creating new ones. The turning point in our family healing came when we decided to host a memorial service for both Margaret and Grandpa at the cottage in Traverse City. It was a small gathering, just our immediate family, Linda, and a few of Margaret's neighbors who'd become friends over the years. Mrs. Peterson, who lived next door, shared stories about Margaret that helped us understand who she'd been. She was the kind of person who remembered everyone's birthday, Mrs. Peterson told us. She'd bake cookies for the mailman at Christmas, and she always asked about my grandchildren by name. She talked about you, Sarah, all the time. She called you her lost granddaughter and said she was saving all her stories to tell you someday. Another neighbor, Mr. Kim, talked about Margaret's garden. "She planted those roses for you," he said, pointing to a beautiful rose garden that overlooked the lake. She said she was going to teach her granddaughter about flowers when they finally met. As we stood by the lake that evening, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and pink, I realized that the inheritance wasn't really about money. It was about connection, about the threads that bind families together, even across decades of separation. Mom took the news about her adoption and family connections better than any of us expected. "It explains why I always felt so comfortable with your grandfather," she told me. "I guess blood really does call to blood." But she also struggled with questions about identity and belonging. "Am I still a Mitchell?" she asked Dad one evening. "Or am I a Sullivan? Or am I something else entirely?" "You're whoever you want to be," Dad told her. "You're the woman I fell in love with, the mother who raised Sarah, the daughter who cared for your adoptive parents until they died. The paperwork doesn't change any of that." Dad and I have grown closer through all of this. He's been helping me learn how to manage the financial aspects of the inheritance, and I've been helping him understand the art world that I'm now able to fully embrace. The money has given me opportunities I never dreamed of. I've been able to quit taking freelance jobs I didn't want, to focus on my own artistic vision instead of constantly chasing clients. I've traveled to art museums in New York and Chicago, studied with master painters in workshops I could never have afforded before. But I've also learned that money without purpose is meaningless. That's why I've used some of the inheritance to pay off my parents' mortgage and to set up college funds for my cousins. I've also started a foundation that provides grants to young artists, something I think both Grandpa and Margaret would have approved of. The Sarah Mitchell Foundation for Emerging Artists has already helped 12 young people pursue their dreams. There's Maria, a 19-year-old from Hamtramck, who's studying sculpture at the College for Creative Studies. There's Jason, a photographer from Flint, who's documenting the city's recovery. There's Aisha, a painter from Detroit's East Side, who's creating murals that tell the stories of her neighborhood. Each time I meet with one of these artists, I think about the letter Grandpa wrote me, about his hope that this money would give me the freedom to become the person he always knew I could be. But I've realized that true freedom comes not just from having financial security, but from using that security to help others find their own paths. The most important change, though, is that our family talks now, really talks. We've learned that secrets, even well-intentioned ones, can cause more damage than truth, even when truth is complicated. We have family dinners every Sunday now, rotating between our houses. Last week, we were at the cottage in Traverse City, and Dad grilled fish that we'd caught from the dock that morning. Mom has been learning about Margaret's recipes, trying to connect with the grandmother she never knew. I've been painting landscapes of the lake, trying to capture the beauty that Margaret saw every day in her final years. During one of these dinners, Linda brought up something that had been bothering her. "Do you think Bill would be happy with how this all turned out?" We were quiet for a moment, thinking about that question. "I think he'd be surprised," Dad said finally. "I think he expected more drama, more conflict. He was always worried about people fighting over money. But he'd be proud," Mom added. "He'd be proud that we figured out how to be a family even with all these secrets. He'd be proud of Sarah," Linda said, looking at me. "He always said you had more potential than you realized. I think he'd love seeing what you're doing with the foundation." Last Sunday, I went to Grandpa's grave with a bouquet of flowers and a copy of my first gallery showing announcement. The exhibition is called Hidden Histories, a series of paintings exploring family secrets and the stories we tell ourselves about who we are. The paintings are abstract but emotional, using color and texture to represent the complexity of family relationships. There's one called The Weight of Secrets that shows heavy, dark shapes pressing down on lighter, more vibrant colors trying to emerge. Another called The Truth Sets Free shows those same bright colors breaking through and spreading across the canvas. The opening night was incredible. The gallery was packed with people, friends, family, other artists, collectors who'd heard about the work. But the moment that meant the most to me was when I saw my parents standing in front of the centerpiece painting, a large canvas called Love Letters Never Sent. The painting was inspired by Margaret's journal entries, by all the words she'd written but never been able to share with her daughter and granddaughter. It shows fragments of text floating in a sea of blue and gold, words trying to reach across time and distance to find their intended recipients. "It's beautiful," Mom whispered, and I saw tears in her eyes. It's like she's finally able to say everything she wanted to say. 3 of the paintings sold that night, but I donated the proceeds to a literacy program in Detroit. The money isn't what matters anymore. It's the ability to tell stories, to help people understand that families are complicated, messy, beautiful things that don't always fit into neat categories. "Thank you," I whispered to Grandpa's headstone that Sunday. "For the money, yes, but more for showing me that families are more resilient than we think." As I walked back to my car, I thought about the letter he'd written me, about his hope that this inheritance would give me the freedom to become the person he always knew I could be. I think he'd be proud of who I'm becoming. But more than that, I think he'd be proud that his family survived his secrets and came out stronger on the other side. The cottage in Traverse City has become our family retreat. We spend holidays there now, and I've set up a small studio in the sunroom where Margaret used to read. Sometimes I sit in her chair and look out at the lake, wondering what she would think about how everything turned out. I like to imagine her and Grandpa somewhere together, maybe sitting on a dock overlooking an eternal lake, finally able to share all the stories they never got to tell in life. I picture them watching our family dinners with satisfaction, knowing that their complicated plan worked out better than they dared to hope. Sometimes the most valuable things we inherit aren't money or property, Sometimes they're truths that help us understand who we really are and where we really belong. The envelope in the toolbox changed my life, but it didn't change the most important thing. I'm still Sarah Mitchell, daughter of Robert and Janet, granddaughter of William Thompson, great-great-niece of Margaret Sullivan. I'm all of these things at once, and finally, that feels like enough. But now, I'm also something else. I'm the keeper of family stories, the one who makes sure that the love and sacrifice of previous generations isn't forgotten. I'm the bridge between the past and the future, carrying forward the dreams and hopes of people I never got to meet, but who shaped my life in ways I'm only beginning to understand. And maybe that's the real inheritance, not the money, but the responsibility to honor the love that made it all possible.